I'm the real estate guy. My name is Ethan. I'm a real estate agent with Irongate Realtors. And this is the Brick and Banter Podcast. Very special guest today, Jimmy Sandstorm Sandlin, off his fresh victory, right?
That's right. I won a couple weeks ago now. First round KO. I think I won in a minute, 45 seconds.
Hell yeah. Dude, that's awesome. Is that the first? That can't be the first round KO.
No, it's not my first round one knockout. I think I've had at least one other, maybe 2 round ones, so like 3 total, professionally. I know the one before this one, I went to Canada and I knocked out a really good, local guy. I think he was 10-4, 10-5 at the time. He had 8 knockouts on his record. So to put him out in round one in his hometown, I mean, that felt great. That gave me a lot of momentum.
That's sick. I didn't know you were fighting in other countries. That's freaking cool.
Yeah. I've been international to fight. I've also fought international competition, here in the States. This last fight was in Louisville, Kentucky. Pretty good guy. Really good guy. I'm not quite sure where he trains out of, if it's Southern Kentucky or Tennessee. His brother is actually in the UFC.
Oh, nice.
So to get a big win over this guy, that was a really good win for me.
Yeah, because I'm sure those two train together. So.
Oh, yeah, I would imagine. I'm sure he's got the time and the resources to travel and train and, get his camps in wherever. I'm a little limited, but these past 2 months I've been able to travel, more. I've had, more flexibility and time on my hands to, travel a little bit, work with specific guys, and that 100% made the difference for this, past victory.
Hell yeah. So are you training with people from that know like specific styles? Like, are you going to a Muay Thai person to learn Muay Thai and a wrestler to learn wrestler? Or do you go into just like a generic MMA, like they just know everything, one-stop shop?
It used to be where I would go, jiu-jitsu only, Muay Thai only, boxing only. I had limited range, in the mileage that I could venture out to, in the past. Now, I've got more control over, personal things in my life. And also I've got freedom with, paying off, debts or working, flexible jobs where I haven't had in the past. So now, I venture out, to upper level gyms where, there's UFC fighters, there's UFC caliber coaches there. And for me, it's actually the opposite now, where in the past I would train with, style specific or style only, type of gyms or type of fighters. These past more like 2.5 months, really, I'm going to these MMA gyms. So I'm getting, the MMA versions of boxing, Muay Thai, wrestling, jiu-jitsu. And I'm also using the cage. That's been really the biggest hole in my game, in my whole career, is just being able to train like MMA, but using the cage. I had to learn, from the ground up. So like, I wrestled growing up, but like, I didn't know how to do jiu-jitsu. I didn't know how to box, didn't know how to do Muay Thai. And really, I still didn't even know how to do MMA. Working with these, bigger level gyms with the resources, they have the money to spend on full-size cages, 1, 2, however many. They can bring in these coaches and these fighters, and it's a blended style. So I had to learn from the ground up, but now I'm at the point to where, I'm blending it for MMA specifically, because that sport has a specific style and you have to be at a specific strategy to fight, those fights. Like, boxing, you can pace yourself. Jiu-jitsu, you can pace yourself. MMA, that's like running a sprint for the whole time, whether it's 15 minutes or 25 minutes for a 5-round fight. That's been the biggest hole in my game, because I would, pace myself or wait until the end or not utilize, the cage work, because there's a lot of technique when you're fighting somebody with, a cage to back them up to or to fight off of the cage. That also plays into, getting somebody tired, like strategy, and also just overwhelming somebody. Like we all train in open space, if you're a boxer or Muay Thai or kickboxer, or whether you're doing jiu-jitsu or wrestling, you have an open space to work with, and you have lines that are out of bounds, and then you get a reset. You go back to the middle. MMA, there is no reset. There is no out of bounds. You're stuck on the cage or putting somebody on the cage, if you get to those limits. And that's something that, surprisingly, I've never had my eyes open to before. I figured out those holes in my game, and I made the correct adjustments while also being blessed with, some freedom and some time to travel, for these camps. And, for this last fight, that made 100% of the difference.
Yeah, I remember I was training. I was just at Queen City. Shout out to Queen City. Freaking awesome down in Middletown. Or Franklin?
Originally from Middletown. I think it's Franklin now.
Yeah, I always get those two confused because they're like right next to each other, and I only ever go down there for Queen City. But I remember I was helping, I think it was Zach, train for one of his fights because he was fighting a taller guy. And that was the first time ever messing with the wall because, like you said, I always had that just big open space. He took me down on the wall, and then we were just trying to get up. It was completely different than anything else because he had like wrapped my legs up and the wall was against me, and I had no idea what to do. So like you said, it completely changes it.
It really is terrifying. I wrestled my whole life. I've picked up jiu-jitsu. We're both purple belts. It doesn't matter what belt you are. Like the wall work, on an MMA fence. I mean, even in a padded room, like it's terrifying if those are your limits for the sport because you're using way more energy than you realize. And if you're constantly like, getting taken down, coming up, and then getting your feet swept out again, like the up and down is suffocating. Like you literally feel like you're drowning. And if you can't, turn away from the cage, if you can't circle center or, reverse the guy, then you're literally stuck on the cage, or you accept getting taken down and then being stuck in the corner, like of the mat and the fence. So now your head is pinned on the floor, but also on the side, where the fence is. Both positions are dangerous. And, from an MMA, perspective, it's super dangerous because those are 2 points of contact where you're more susceptible to becoming, KO'd or submitted.
Yeah, there's not a lot of room to move then. So I know there's a famous clip of BJ Penn where he like kicked somebody and they like bounced off the cage and he used that as a punch. Are you using anything like that too, or mainly for just keeping them in position and takedowns?
It'd be nice to be flashy. Everybody wants to be flashy. That's literally where you get all eyes on you. That's where you get a lot of, traction or, popularity. There had been one time, in the past, this would have been 2019. I was at a gym for about a year, and they had like half of a fence. So, you could kind of get some work in, as far as like, cage work or like, flashy techniques, because that is a technique, to bounce or spring off of the cage. Like if my back's on the cage, I can spring off of that for like a kick or a punch or to dodge the opponent. You could literally use it to like, cartwheel or flip over the opponent if you wanted to avoid, takedowns or strikes. You kind of see it sometimes in jiu-jitsu. I mean, even MMA, like say you get taken down on the fence and you're trying to shrimp out, to avoid your guard getting passed, mounted, punched, elbow, whatever. If your only points of contact, on the flat surface, you're limited. But if you're on the cage, you have that side wall where you can use your feet on the ground or on the wall to like push or twist or shrimp or get up. So, ideally you would never want to be on the bottom in like an MMA fight. But now, like, if you find yourself there, like if you are in the cage, like you can use your feet, your arms, whatever you can to make contact and, push that off and try to stand up or reverse or sweep the opponent.
Who's been like the hardest person you fought so far?
I've been working with this guy recently, part of my training camp. I'll travel out and I'll see this guy specifically. His coaches are amazing. All the other training partners are amazing too. His name's Abe Al-Sagir, really good MMA fighter. He's a big prospect right now in the lightweight division. And, he's been kind enough to ask me to train with him and his team. His coaches have been, really welcoming. I got to travel, but that's okay because I know the quality of work is, top tier. But originally, I had a fight with him, and that's kind of where my eyes got opened, to like grappling and cage work. I've had some dog fights in the past. I fought some really tough guys in the past. Win or lose. I would say Al-Sagir has been the best opponent I've ever gone against. I've gone against people who have fought in the UFC, not 1, 2, or 3, more than that. And Al-Sagir has been the toughest opponent I've fought. So, for him to ask me to train and get some work in with him, it's really been a blessing, two-way work. I'm helping him, he's helping me, former opponents, but now, training partners whenever.
That's awesome. What makes him so good? Is it just like specific techniques that he used, or he's got some kind of level of control?
Really, it's the control. Surprisingly, I think he's maybe like a ground zero person. So he didn't start out boxing only. He didn't start out wrestling only. My knowledge, I think he, was a really tough guy, growing up, strong guy, athletic guy. He just got in with a really good gym, really good coaches, and, formed, his MMA style. That turned him into a good grappler, a good striker, a good fighter. So I don't think, he started in one specific area, but he's tough because he knows how to use what he's got. The way his body is structured, he uses his strength, his setups, his natural fighting, strategies and abilities. He knows how to use what he has and then blend that to an MMA style. That's what makes him good. That's what would really make anybody really good is you don't have to be, a Golden Gloves champion or a national wrestling champion or a black belt. It definitely helps, right? I would love to be all three of those. Yeah. But, I think, what really makes them good and what has helped me become a much better version of myself, as a fighter is using the strategy of the sport. So they know how to use, what their body is capable of using. And they also know how to use that for the pace of an MMA fight. Because, it's not boxing, it's not jiu-jitsu, it's not wrestling, it's not even, running or swimming or whatever. It has a specific strategy, and you have to have a specific output, to get to where you need to be at. So those are the things that opened my eyes, and that's why I think that he's the best fighter that I've ever fought. I think, cumulative, I've had over 40 fights, countless wrestling matches, hundreds of jiu-jitsu matches. And, out of everybody I've gone against, as a martial artist, I think Al-Sagir is the best one because they know how to, use what their body's capable of and how to be strong and efficient for the sport that they're in.
That's cool. That's some high praise. Are you still working on that secret move?
Now, I do have a couple secret moves.
Oh, cool. The list goes on.
Yes and no. Well, actually, it kind of does now that I think about it. But I have yet to pull them off, in a live scenario. So they're secret, but are they?
How many we got now?
Let's see. I had one that was like, oh, no one's seen this before. I've been working on 2 of them since last year. And then I have one other, a 4th one, but I would really just call that more of a bread and butter move. It's not a flashy technique, but it's somewhere that, I can get to and my body mechanics are able to do that move, very well for me. Not that I'm like, a black belt or a world beater, but like I do have, three specific, actually, no, I got four specific moves now that I've been working on. They're flashy. They're not your standard jujitsu moves. Like I actually struggle with doing a rear naked choke, a guillotine, an armbar, a triangle. I study with, more the fundamentals and the basics versus like the flashy stuff, because there'll be a couple of positions that I get into, from like a wrestling perspective where, it's either a wrestling move or it's like half of a wrestling move before it becomes like illegal.
Yeah.
Like they call it potentially dangerous, but like an illegal move. So I'll do the potentially dangerous move or the funky position because my body mechanics are used to getting there because of the sport of wrestling. And in jujitsu, like people tend, like if you've never trained with me or rolled with me, like you wouldn't know like, oh my gosh, he's going to do this move, like right away or right now. Like, similar to like your situation. You have more secret moves than me. You can do way more moves than I can do. And if you've never rolled or competed against you, everybody will get caught in something. And that's what makes you dangerous. That's what makes, athletes dangerous in general is, everybody will have a fundamental base knowledge of, whatever sport they're in. They'll have their physical capabilities. Everybody has their limits, but the best athletes tend to be the ones that you can't train for, or the ones that do, moves that other people can't do, or have body mechanics that other people can't do. Like if you watch, highlights, or even like talking about maybe you specifically, like you're way more flexible than me. You do way more dangerous moves than me, but that's to your advantage. And I've seen you countless times catch people. You've submitted me, I don't know how many times. So like, when I get a couple moves on somebody in practice, they don't see it right away, and I'll catch them off guard. But then, I'm not as flashy. So in general, like I tend to be more basic. I tend to, try to like tire out, my opponents or my training partners. There's just kind of like more my style. Something that I can, elevate myself, to surpassing, just let's get somebody tired. But like, for long-term athletes, like the best athletes do things that other people can't do. And that's why, they have wins over, big name people. They have certain rankings or, certain records, is because their body mechanics is what, helps them, be like top tier of the best of the best.
I've got some things going for me. I'm tall and flexible. Not a lot of people have like the combination of that. So I can pull off some silly crap that I've seen on Instagram and just surprise people with some. As far as like, I don't know, the practicality that ends once they figure out the trick, there's a lot of tricks. So you catch with people with a few things, but like Nathan, you remember rolling with Nathan?
Yeah. Yep.
Like I caught him with something once, never going to catch him with that again.
Those are how my moves tend to go. You're more versatile than me. So you have more to work with than me. But yeah, that tends to be the case. Like, you catch somebody once or twice and they're like, oh, I see that coming. And that's kind of where people maybe plateau in, training, is because, we catch these people and then, oh man, what happened? We can't get them no more. Like they know our styles. But then you see the difference. Like when you compete, you'll do your same move and you'll catch somebody and you'll be like, oh, I got it. Like that's kind of been like, a case for me. Used to, I would plateau, kind of quick. Like, I'm not super versatile or flashy. So like, I would tend to plateau a little bit more than other people might. But then literally, like you said, like you might see something online and I'm going to try that out. then you try it out and it's like you rediscover the sport.
Yeah.
Like there's a new like motivation. You feel like a whole brand new person.
There's always new stuff to learn. They're always coming up with new things, which is always cool.
Oh yeah. I don't know if you've seen, I'm sure you have, where now they're starting to work with, like the matrix that you're in. Before it was like, flat mats for wrestling, for
the tilted, like slanted wall stuff.
yeah.
Yeah.
Now we're working with slanted walls or boxing rings or, fences for MMA. But like, the big thing now is the slanted walls. Like you got karate combat doing that. You've got, really high level jujitsu matches with these walls. So, now it's kind of like, okay, you can't go out of bounds and then reset in the middle. Like now you're like on a slanted wall or now you're on a fence. Like those are the matrices you're working with. So like you said, like there's always new things to learn. The game's always evolving and elevating. And it doesn't matter if you're a black belt. Like if you've never trained on a slanted wall or a cage, a white belt might beat you because, maybe you're on the same level, within the matrix that you're in, or maybe they might know something you don't know. So, the game's constantly elevating and changing.
Yeah, there's that new element, like you said, being up against the wall where you're not used to that. That slanted wall is completely different than that wall, or no wall at all.
Yeah, or no wall at all. I've seen debates about MMA match or fights specifically, where we have rounds, round 1, 2, 3, 5, whatever, boxing 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 15. You got rounds and breaks, whereas jiu-jitsu, like you could go like a 6-minute match, a 10-minute match, whichever. So there's been debates about, should MMA have rounds? Should MMA be one round? And I feel like that's a similar kind of situation for jiu-jitsu, where now they're doing, okay, well, we have flat mats. What if we had like slanted walls or straight walls or fences or, just different ways to elevate the strategy and then the overall game.
First time I met you, you had no tattoos, and then all of a sudden, I didn't see you for a while, and then you're just covered in tattoos.
Yeah, literally. Or my hair might change, which is funny. But yeah, I had always, thought about getting tattoos. Ever since high school, really. I was actually on the way to get my first one. I was still in high school, but I was just, in fear, of for sure what my parents might think. But just in general, like coaches, jobs, whichever. Times are different now. Things are a lot more accepted. And I mean, like, it takes time to like, actually get a tattoo or a piercing or whichever that you might do. I don't have any piercings, but they take time to heal. So just, between, wrestling and jujitsu and fighting, I didn't have the time to necessarily get one. I had the fear, of maybe what like the people closest to me might think. But then over time, I'm like, nah, I don't care about that. Like, I'm gonna go do what I was wanting to do. Now I got more time to like plan it out. Pretty much, it's I was kind of typical. It's like you get one, okay, I'll get one more, just one more, and then
Then you're covered.
then you're covered.
Any significance behind the big bat? Because that's a statement piece right there. That's like that stands out.
Oh yeah, well there's for me there's a lot of significance with that piece. I've had a lot of ups and downs in my life. I've had to overcome a lot of hurdles in my life. And really what has built me, like what has made me become the person that I've become, today is a lot of like, my experiences and failures and struggles. I've hit rock bottom multiple times. The times that I've had to do that, I've like you always have to adapt. You got to pick yourself back up, or else that's it for you, or that's where you're going to stay. So the times that I've had to pick myself back up was always third shift at night. I used to do these jobs from like 5 p.m. until like 6 or 7 a.m. And then have my son picked up in the morning, take them back to my house, sleep when I could. I operate on a low amount of sleep while working, full-time hours, overtime, a full-time athlete, a dad. The times that I've had to, build myself back up is the times in the night. Third shift work, third shift exercise, workouts, studying. I also like, the supernatural side of like, vampire bats, but like vampires. I like, that type of genre of things. And, to do what I do, you have to have, some sort of like, supernatural like abilities or talents. So, it's a vampire bat. And, for me, like, I think it kind of represents like, who I am front and center. Like they're nocturnal. I've had to do a lot of working and hunting and exercising and just, overall work and hurdles in the nighttime. I've had to, surpass, the limits physically and mentally, supernaturally, almost like a vampire, but not, on that level, of course. So I've just tried to take, like the symbolism, like kind of like the power, the confidence, and like the rebuilding, of those elements and putting it like, front and center on my body to remind me like, I built myself, in the late hours, of each night. I still do. I'm always hunting. I'm always, working and on the go and traveling. Like, I operate in the daytime now, but like where I made the biggest gains was at night. And, a vampire bat just kind of front and center. And that's kind of what, helps represent like, me and kind of like, the struggles that I've kind of had to overcome.
Where can people find you?
People can find me on Instagram. I'm most active on Instagram. My handle is the Sandstorm JS. You might be able to find me if you just type in my first and last name, Jimmy Sandlin. I also have a Facebook. I don't really use it that much though. Like primarily you can find me on Instagram. I do have a TikTok, but I operate mostly on Instagram.
Hell yeah, man. I appreciate you taking the time to come out here. I know you got to run, but we'll get you back in here eventually, do a much longer one.
Well, thank
That's
you for
awesome,
your
man.
time, Ethan.